Adelaide Demands Blood. Ramtidings, dear friends. Where last we left off, we met my sister and her boyfriend, the Lady Adelaide and Cogsworth, who had agreed to attend tabletop games with me in an effort to separate the wheat from the chaff and find a fitting soul to fill that fabled fourth seat. Last adventure, however, resulted in a dose of double trouble as both candidates, an entitled misogynist and a sneaky penny thief, found themselves caught in the traps laid by my cunning sister. However, the mythical fourth seat remains unfilled, and so my Herculean quest to find a somewhat normal human being continues in this tale from the tabletop, lovingly subtitled Fatal Attraction. If you're not up to speed, or if you just don't feel like reading, then the wonderful Regs can serenade you with our bountifully bearded story so far at the following links. PT 1. PT 2. As a word of caution, this one might upset some of our more sensitive friends with some disgusting topics or graphic descriptions. Parental discretion is advised. I was back at square one yet again. My forays into the last new LGS had proved fruitless, and I debated the merits of returning there thoroughly. Most assuredly, I would run into Faulkner the meme lord there, and his disposition would be as sour as the smell of his armpits. Running into Bradford would certainly be awkward, too. I don't think he'd be one to brag about getting caught in a rat trap while digging through a stranger's underwear drawer, but his injured hand would certainly draw questions from his friends, and those could poison the well of potential players I had to draw upon. Especially if he did reveal some degree of truth about the incident that caused it. It was better to avoid them entirely, and write that LGS off as a dead end, it seemed. To make matters worse, my sister wouldn't stop bugging me. Every day she would pester me, wondering when I was going to bring her new friends with which to play. I had become her dealer, she became my client, and she needed her fix. I reminded her that my end goal was to find a person who could integrate into my Dark Souls campaign with Ada and not cause trouble. I was not trying to senselessly torture neckbeards. She asked me, however, if that integration necessarily had to happen right away. Surely, we could mess with a few just for speeps and giggles, couldn't we, Ramtide? I suppose we could. Adelaide. I had created a monster, and it demanded a tribute of bearded blood. Fortunately, I lived in a large city. And the nice thing about large cities is that you can avoid the consequences of your actions if you are so inclined. I could avoid Bradford and Faulkner forever, and there was no shortage of new places to go if I was willing to simply make the trip. I found yet another shop a little further away this time, all thanks to the glory of the internet. Before I left, I approached Adelaide, and asked if she wanted to come along for the trip. She had not yet descended into the belly of the beast known as the LGS, but I figured that the hunter ought to have the luxury of choosing its mark. She was giddy like a kid on Christmas. We got in the car and drove off. As we drove, we were talking, and came to agree that she could choose one mark, and I would choose the other. We arrived then at the LGS on that gloomy autumn afternoon and approached the door. On the way in, I grabbed the door and held it for her, unable to resist saying "Milady" as an ironic jest. That might have been a mistake. However, as I walked inside, I felt the awkward silence and the eyes boring into my chest, as if I were a sheriff walking into a southwestern saloon with a wanted poster. I tried to beam around at this new gathering of nerds, but the ones who had their focus upon me dripped venom, silently screaming, "How dare a gentleman less magnificent than I, Milady, the woman of my dreams." The others ignored me, busy craning their necks trying to get a look at my sister. I glanced at my sister. I don't think anything could have prepared her for the overwhelming odors crammed into this shop that now assaulted her senses. She struggled back tears as pungent tendrils of belly semen and regret snaked into her nostrils. Her face was twisted in a grimace that spoke volumes, but as quickly as it came, she let out a sigh, and managed to wipe it away. She replaced it with a plastic and inviting smile, and strode confidently among the shelves and tables, scouting for her dashing, socially cueless prince whom she would ruthlessly torture. I wanted the tables as well, eavesdropping on my sister's conversations, occasionally striking up one of my own. She would put a line into the water, mentioning she was part of an RPG group that needed players, but only wanted top-notch role players to join her party. Many stumbled all over themselves to present their honors, accolades, and regalia, begging to be picked by her to come join the game, only to be shot down. However, these lads were too tame. Too much gentlemanly behavior and sadness at the realizations of their denial. It would be a waste of her talents. She walked back to me, looking exasperated, her mournful eyes conveying that none of these poor souls were worthy of her abuse, and opened her mouth to speak, when a voice from a practically unpopulated corner of the shop that we had overlooked spoke some enchanting words. "Roll for anal circumference." She shut her mouth, cracked her knuckles, put her smile on, turned about, and walked towards the table from whence it came. The game they were running paused as she walked up to their GM and placed her hand upon his shoulder. She leaned over the table, fighting back the urge to vomit or flee. "Their GM will need a name," so we will use his character name, Duster Hansen, or, simply, Duster. Adelaide, what are you playing? Duster, we're playing Fatal. You've probably never heard of it. Adelaide, you're right, I haven't. I'm intrigued. All I heard was roll for anal circumference and I had to see what the hell you guys were on about. Duster, it's a pretty underground game. None of these other kids could handle it anyways. It's a game for real men who aren't afraid to get nasty. Well, the party is trying to get information out of one of the town guards that they kidnapped, but he doesn't want to talk, so one of our party members has decided to rape the information out of him. He's a troll berserker and he rolled high on his penis length. He also has acid semen, so he might not only rip his asshole wide open, but dissolve his guts too if he climaxes inside him. I can appreciate an underground system. I absolutely love independent publications for my tabletop games. I've run great games using fan publications of Fallout, Rust, Dark Souls, etc. I write homebrew settings all the time, and have taken a dive headlong into the mechanical aspects of RPG creation as a labor of love. Fatal, or fantasy adventure to adult lechery, however, is an abomination, running against all good sense, etiquette, and morality. Fatal is to role players what child molesters are to prisoners. A bad joke at best, if not outright shunned and hated. Most pretend it doesn't exist to the best of their abilities or that nobody would ever actually read such a thing let alone play it. But it is very much real. The rulebook is easy to find and free to download. And no matter how niche you think something is, there will be an audience for it somewhere. So just who would even play such a thing? If I did manage to round up a very mature group of players who were okay with it and were willing to do a stupid one-shot to explore its depraved depths and then absolutely never mention it again, I still wouldn't do it. I have no desire to trawl through almost 1,000 pages of character creation rules to determine the resistance of my character's hymen or whether they experience sexual arousal at the sight of farm animals. I usually won't even roleplay regular sexual encounters in vanilla settings with people unless it's consensual and with a girl who I find attractive. I'm not about to roleplay their poop fetish, how well they urinate on a hooker, or the consummation of a marriage to one's child bride with anyone. Especially not a neckbeard. This doesn't even touch on the most disturbing aspect of it all. However, and that is this. Someone, somewhere in this world which you and I both populate, decided that this is a game that the RPG community needed. Now ERP is nothing new, people do it casually all the time, and even make dedicated game systems for it. Let these mermaids touch your dick maybe has some glowing reviews, for example, but Fatal takes it to an extreme which no sane person should want to go. This didn't stop Adelaide, though. My sister had found her mark, and baby Jesus wept. Adelaide, that's fascinating. You know, I've been looking for some really good role players to come fill out our party for a game we've been running. It's not Fatal. It's GURPS, steampunk style. But we need another player. You're a GM, so you must know what you're doing. Would you be willing to join our game? Tee-hee. I hate you. Adelaide. Duster Hansen, however, was all about it. Getting touched on the shoulder was more sensual contact from a woman than this tub of grease could seemingly endure, as his eyes bulged with violence or lust and his face flushed bright red. He was getting invited to a tabletop game by a girl after he explained his rectally exploded torture rape scenario. She might as well have ripped off her clothes and thrown herself on the table, demanding his ravisher then and there. Duster, of course I'll play with you guys. Who's running the game anyway? Is it someone else at the shop? You should just ditch them and come play with us. They're probably just regular boring nerds. Adelaide, actually, the GM is here with me. Hey, GM, come over here. I found us a player. I took a deep breath and stopped pretending to focus on the book I had been reading, setting it back in its place upon the shelf. Steeling myself, I approached the table. 5 gawking nerds of various shapes and sizes gauged me with disapproving looks upon their faces as I drew near. I ignored all of them but the one whom my sister had laid her hand upon. Usually, when I'm trying to sucker people in, I'm a bit less curt than I was with them. GM, hi. Duster, really? This guy? Have you ever even ran a game before? Hey, Adelaide. Is this your boyfriend or what? He looks like a loser. I guess I could join his game, but I'm sure it's gonna suck. What's your name? I'm Duster. I suppose the stark contrast between him and I would make a high-level basement dweller such as he have doubts. I was younger than he by a good 10 years at least. He was easily twice as wide as me, balding, and his smell was formidable, even from across the table. He stood up and extended a hand for me to shake, and I reached out to grab that Cheeto-stained limb. Have you ever met somebody who squeezes your hand way too tightly for no good reason when they shake hands with you? He was that person. He smiled broadly, exposing his stained and yellowing teeth caked in plaque. Not one to back down from a challenge, I returned the favor of his firm grip, and even dug my nails into his skin where I could. I saw him wince, and he backed off, but only slightly. When at last he let go, I wiped my hand clean, leaving an orange streak of cheese powder on the thigh of my pants. GM. Name's GM. Did she tell you what we're playing? Duster. Yeah, but steampunk? Come on. That's a setting for little kids. I've got way better homebrew settings I could run for you guys. Hell, I'd even let you join my fatal game if you'd like. But you're bringing the snacks, newbie. Milady can just bring herself. Though. GM. My time's limited. Do you want to join our game or not? He scoffed and said, no, not really, and then turned to my sister and asked her if perhaps she'd care to come back on her own time and play with them. Away from me. My sister offered the same excuse as I. And Duster groaned a bit, realizing that the only way he was going to get to spend any time with her was through me. Duster, I guess I'll join your stupid game, but only because this lovely creature here asked me to. Let me get your phone number. He turned to my sister to collect her digits, and she didn't hesitate. She excitedly gave Duster mine, and added on that she hoped to hear from him soon and that she was excited for game day. Hey, she said goodbye, and stepped away from the table, motioning for me to follow her. We walked to the front of the shop and I stepped outside to have a smoke and catch some fresh air, and she joined me, letting all of her pent-up disgust flow freely. She finally calmed down, and said she was going to go have a seat in the car. She had found a mighty neckbeard indeed, and the task of interacting with him was physically and mentally draining for her. It was for me, too. As ready as I was to just drive out of there and call it a day. However, I was still dedicated to the task of finding one more player for our party, and so would go once more onto the breach. Dear friends, I could feel the hostility subside ever so slightly as I returned into that shop alone without Adelaide. Desperate and lonely men are a funny thing, aren't they? They see a man with someone who they find attractive and instantly become confrontational and vindictive. But the moment that they see them alone, somehow they almost revert back to decent human behavior. Adelaide had found her beastly beardlord she intended to victimize. My mind was on Ada again. She was becoming a good friend, and deserved a tabletop experience where she could feel and be safe. I was going to accomplish that regardless of what I had to put myself through to make it happen. The hardest part now was finding a nerd who had at least one iota of normal human decency to his name and see if he could pass the test that laid before him. I walked through the shop, talking to people. Some gave me the cold shoulder while they stewed in quiet jealousy. Others asked me who that girl was that I had come in with, and if there was something going on between us while they drooled at the thought of their chances. One guy even stuck his leg out as I walked past his seat and tried to trip me. I wanted to yell at the top of my lungs that Adelaide was my peeping sister, but it would lay the trap bare. The rest were simply unable to join, whether due to time constraints or a lack of interest for the game that I would be running. I had exhausted the shop of options, and stepped outside. Mentally exhausted now myself, I lit one more smoke and contemplated my luck when a car pulled up in the parking lot. A side door opened on a silver minivan and I heard a nasally voice yell, "Thanks, Mom." A short, pudgy young man in his late teens or early 20s hopped out of the back of the minivan, carrying a Pokemon trainer backpack and stumbling over his own feet as he trudged towards the door where I stood. His shoes had holes in them, and I could see his graying socks poking out and his toes wiggling with each step. His clothes were far too big for him, and his pants were bunched up beneath his belt buckle. The pits of his shirt were stained with sweat, and a trilby bounced atop his head. Perched atop his fat little cherub cheeks were some glasses that constantly shifted out of place. He got close to the door and we made eye contact, and he practically yelled hello at me. He didn't have very good volume control, and his high-pitched, nasally, whiny voice made the hairs on my neck stand up. Still, I returned his greeting, and asked him how his day was going. This champ in the making needs a name, and we will use the name of his character. Osgood Bowles. Osgood, I'm doing really good. I didn't have to work today. It's my day off, so I'm gonna play some Magic. Do you want to see my deck? Can you tell me what you think? I just made it. I don't know if it's any good, and I think everybody's gonna make fun of me cause it isn't a regular standard deck like Burn or Gent, but I think it'll do really good if I just get somebody to play against, and he rattled out this information faster than an M60 burning through a belt of ammunition. He was enthusiastic and friendly, albeit unaware of his volume and perhaps lacking in social tact. And despite all this, he was an absolute breath of fresh air after my meeting with Duster. GM, sure, let me see what you're playing. He fished out a deck box and produced his cards, and I shuffled through them. I'm not much of a Magic player. I can't justify spending money on playing cards, but I have dabbled in the game, and I do like it. I looked it over, and offered my comments, namely that he was playing my favorite colors black/red, and that's about as far as my knowledge of the game cares to go, and he started gushing about how cool they were as archetypes, ignoring, or perhaps more likely, unaware of the building fatigue I had growing on my face, while I listened to him ramble on and on about the new set and the interactions and the plays he could make. Eventually, however, He paused to take a breath, and I interrupted him. GM, do you play RPGs at all? Osgood, I love RPGs. My friend ran a D&D campaign not that long ago and I was playing a bard, and there was this ogre guarding a treasure hoard and we went to get it and the barbarian charged, and then the ogre swung at him and... Take a breath, damn it. GM, okay, great. Do you want to play some RPGs with me and my playgroup? We're doing GURP Steampunk. Osgood was surprised at first that someone would ask him of all people to join their game, and then proceeded to answer my question with a full auto affirmative. He explained at great length that he didn't get to play RPGs with a lot of new people because they found him annoying. He proceeded to opine on why this was the case, and how he couldn't figure out why people shunned his company. When he finally ran out of words to this tragic monologue, I placed one final test before I committed him to our game. I told him about our current playgroup and who it comprised of. Myself, Adelaide, Cogsworth, and Duster. At the mention of Duster, Osgood's cheer faded as he clenched his fists and got quiet. He stared beyond me for a moment. And then eventually, he spoke very slowly with great deliberation. The loud and nasal voice was replaced by a deeper tone, thoughtful, resonant and quiet in its response. Osgood, I don't know if I want to play in that group. I would have hugged the poor kid then and there if I hadn't just met him. I didn't want to play with Duster either. But my sister was bent on toying with him. Seeing Osgood's reaction to the mere mention of his name filled me with sadness, and almost brought a tear to my eye. I could tell that there was bad blood between the two and that something had happened. Perhaps Duster had simply been his usual douchey self to this poor little spurg standing in front of me. Maybe something worse. Who's to say, though, just what exactly happened? Nerds can be downright vicious to each other. As much as I wanted to tell him then and there about the devious plot that had been concocted to punish the ne'er-do-wells of the LGS. As much as I wanted to say that he would enjoy watching the righteous fury and indiscriminate justice that was about to rain down on the head of that insufferable lardass. I bit my tongue. Instead, I looked him in the eye and gave him a sober and enigmatic reply. GM, you don't need to explain anything. Osgood, believe me, I'm right there with you. I don't want to play with him either. But trust me when I say that I think this is a game you won't want to miss. Osgood, why? GM, I can't answer that question. He took great consideration of this last exchange, weighing the moment judiciously, and then agreed to exchange phone numbers with me in his natural rapid-fire style. He said he would get to work on writing up a character right away and would have it ready by our session. I wished him good luck on his magic games, and told him I was looking forward to seeing him again. He picked up his poke bag and strolled into the shop, while I made my way to the car. Inside, my sister was screwing around on her phone. I got in without saying a word. She asked me if I had found her a second victim. I didn't respond. I turned over the engine, punched the car in gear, and drove us home. The rest of the evening passed relatively uneventfully, until about 10 that night, when my phone began to explode with text messages from Duster.